Our objective is clear, and that is to degrade and destroy ISIL so that it's no longer a threat not just to Iraq, but also to the region and to the United States. In order for us to accomplish that, the first phase has been to make sure we've got an Iraqi government that's in place and that we are blunting the momentum that ISIL was carrying out, and the airstrikes have done that.
Joining us now to weigh in on these statements is our senior fellow at the London Center for Policy Research and Center for Advanced Defense Studies, retired U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel Tony Shaffer. Good to see you. Thanks for being with us this early.
Thanks for having me.
You've been watching the president speak. He
Yes.
talked about ISIS, says now it's a very serious threat, been putting together a strategy that's moving effectively, wants to destroy and degrade ISIS and make sure they're not an ongoing threat in the region. Now, this comes on the heels of saying he doesn't have a strategy, but then he says today he was referring to putting troops on the ground in Syria, which needs congressional approval. What do you make of this today? Do you think people are going to be critical of this?
I think we need to look at this through everything he said. If we accept exactly what he just said, that he's had a strategy, he actually mentioned elements of the strategy in his West Point speech. If you accept all that, he's been derelict of his duty. According to him, he's known this as a growing threat, that we've seen this coming, and yet we did nothing. So you can't have it both ways. You can't say we've been studying it, been watching it, and yet we failed to act. So what he said today is still not a strategy. A strategy is something, I don't mean to lecture the president, but a strategy is something that includes both hard and soft power. It includes specific achievable objectives and has to do with a broad, long look at the entire region. What he listed today were tactics. The tactic of going after ISIS, the way he's outlined, is a tactic. It's part of a larger scheme of things that must be done. He's talked about going after the money. That's a tactic. What we need to do is look at what our end goals are. What do we wish to achieve? And then you look at what you want to achieve, and you plan the elements of national power to achieve that. We've not done that. The president has not laid out a strategy, and for goodness sake, I hope he shows up at NATO with a better set of reasoning than what he laid out here.
I did one thing specifically that he said I did want to ask you about, because we know that this administration is very careful about semantics and what words they use. And he said specifically, if we are joined by the international community, then, and I'll paraphrase this, we can lessen the influence, the financing, and the military capability of ISIS, so it is a manageable problem. Is it possible to make ISIS a manageable problem?
That goes to my point. He claims that he's known this for a while and somehow became unmanageable. To become unmanageable and now want to get it back to manageable, we have to now go out and achieve certain things. The London Center for Policy Research, who I belong to, we've had a strategy since July. We've talked about the things that must be done. The first thing that must be done, the president has said, we need to blunt the military ability of ISIS to do what it's doing. That means going into Syria. That should have been something part of the plan from day one if he was serious. Secondly, when we look at this regarding long-term stability, we have to engage allies. We've put forth the idea of a NATO for the Arab world. He's going to NATO. He's going to be talking to the NATO leaders. I think if it worked for Europe, and hopefully it'll work now to stem the Russian advances in Ukraine, if NATO is effective, then we need to look at a NATO format for the Middle East, for the Egyptians, for the Turks, for the Saudis, for the Jordanians, for our allies. And again, this precludes us having to put boots on the ground. The Kurds should be part of that. The Kurds are very effective in their fighting ability and what they're doing. So the president has elements of it here. It's not all bad, but he's not focused it properly. And to be effective, he's got to have a strategy. And it's not just about ISIS. It's about all of radical Islam. Right now, Libya has problems. We're going to talk about it this morning. We don't have time to get to it. The missing aircraft in Libya. There's huge issues here that go beyond ISIS. And until the president recognizes he needs a regional strategy that includes all of radical Islam, that includes our allies, we don't have a strategy.
What do we know about those? There were 11 missing commercial jetliners that were taken from the airport in Tripoli. And now we're getting a warning from the United States, from the White House, saying it could be used to carry out terrorist attacks on the anniversary of 9/11. Pretty scary.
Again, Well, yes, this is another result. The destabilization of Libya is because of President Obama's policy. We've got to understand that our actions have consequences if we act badly or acting not at all. So in this case, we need to do something because these missing aircraft, I'm more concerned about Europe than I am the United States. These aircraft could do grave damage to a number of cities in Europe. With that said, it takes skill, it takes training to use these aircraft effectively. So we need to figure, again, this is something else President Obama needs to look at with our European allies and figure out and chart a strategy and a course forward.
All right. Thank you, Colonel Shaffer, for joining us. We appreciate your